Bonjour à tous, bienvenue dans Smart World, votre rendez-vous de l'actualité économique internationale en partenariat avec CNBC. Je suis ravie de vous retrouver sur Bismart. Margot Haddad sera bien sûr de retour à la présentation de ce rendez-vous dans quelques jours. Au sommaire de cette émission, on parlera bien sûr de ce qui fait l'actualité politique aux États-Unis. La nomination par Donald Trump de Amy Coney Barrett à la Cour suprême. Nous écouterons une partie de son intervention. La deuxième vague du coronavirus en Europe inquiète les États-Unis. Quel impact pourrait-elle avoir sur l'économie américaine, notamment sur les marchés financiers? Réponse tout à l'heure. Enfin, nous parlerons tourisme spatial. Pourquoi les milliardaires comme Elon Musk ou Richard Branson font-ils le pari de la conquête spatiale? Smart World, c'est tout de suite. On commence avec la candidature ce week-end de la conservatrice Amy Coney Barrett à la Cour suprême. Une semaine après la mort de la progressiste Ruth Bader Ginsburg, c'est donc une femme qui a été poussée par Donald Trump pour la remplacer. Un choix stratégique pour le président des États-Unis, candidat à sa réélection, qui cherche avec cette nomination à séduire l'électorat chrétien conservateur. On écoute Amy Coney Barrett qui rend hommage dans ce passage à l'ancienne juge Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
And I am so grateful to you and the First Lady, to the Vice President and the Second Lady, and to so many others here for your kindness on this rather overwhelming occasion. I fully understand that this is a momentous decision for a president. And if the Senate does me the honor of confirming me, I pledge to discharge the responsibilities of this job to the very best of my ability. I love the United States, and I love the United States Constitution. I am truly humbled by the prospect of serving on the Supreme Court. Should I be confirmed, I will be mindful of who came before me. The flag of the United States is still flying at half-staff in memory of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg to mark the end of a great American life. Justice Ginsburg began her career at a time when women were not welcome in the legal profession. But she not only broke glass ceilings, she smashed them. For that, she has won the admiration of women across the country and indeed all over the world. Yes. She was a woman of enormous talent and consequence, and her life of public service serves as an example to us all. Particularly poignant to me was her long and deep friendship with Justice Antonin Scalia, my own mentor. Justices Scalia and Ginsburg disagreed fiercely in print without rancor in person. Their ability to maintain a warm and rich friendship, despite their differences, even inspired an opera. These two great Americans demonstrated that arguments, even about matters of great consequence, need not destroy affection. In both my personal and professional relationships, I strive to meet that standard.
Un discours très axé, vous l'avez entendu, sur la place de la femme en politique. En parlant de Ruth Bader Ginsburg, je cite, « Elle n'a pas seulement cassé le plafond de verre, mais l'a détruit. Elle a montré l'exemple aux femmes du monde entier. » Les auditions pour valider sa nomination devraient démarrer le 12 octobre prochain. Sans chèque de relance, peut-on dire adieu à la consommation aux États-Unis? C'est en tout cas ce que nous dit Barbara Doran, gérante d'une société de gestion à New York. On l'écoute.
Barbara, 4 weeks of declines now. Do you feel like that's enough and it's time to get back in again?
Well, what I think and what I feel are two different things. I think it's plenty, and I'd like to see it over. But and I was, originally in the camp, and still think this, that the correction was started because the high-flying tech stocks and other names had gotten a bit ahead of themselves. You had the momentum traders, the Robinhood traders pushing this up. But at the time, I think a lot of investors assumed that Congress would pass a fiscal stimulus act, and simply because we really need to. when you have unemployment still at nearly 8.5%, the jobless claims are down a bit from 1 million, but they're still well over 800,000. And we are heading into a very risky seasonal health season. So I think the market, which was discounting a V-shaped recovery, is beginning to think, hey, we might have a bit of a pause here. And this fiscal stimulus is looking, we still are hopeful it will happen, but it may be delayed past the election, in which case I think you're going to start to see the impact on consumer spending, and it will start to show up in the data in the not-so-distant future. So I think there is a little more going on here, but I do think the downside is limited. It's still about the Fed, and also what I call the hope of the vaccine. That is a key underpinning here, and when it happens is also a big uncertainty, but I think the confidence level is very high. It will happen and be ready to go and roll out sometime, at least early next year.
Sans second stimulus, les marchés continueront d'être impactés alors que les chiffres du chômage continuent de progresser. Nous devrons peut-être malheureusement attendre après les élections pour sa mise en place. L'arrivée des vaccins peut aussi être un élément clé pour la relance, conclut-elle. Le télétravail serait-il mal vu par les traders de Wall Street? C'est en tout cas ce que confirme le spécialiste business CNBC, Hugh Son. Pourquoi Wall Street veut faire revenir ses salariés au bureau? On l'écoute.
It's somewhat surprising that they're rushing back. In some ways, it is surprising because Wall Street has had blockbuster results so far this year. The first half of the year will probably go down as the best start to a year for trading in the past decade. So when you look at that and you know that most of that has occurred while people are sitting at home, the socialization aspect of Wall Street has always been that you would turn around to your senior, or if you were a manager, you turn around to your junior and you'd bark out commands or you'd ask questions. How do I deal with this? I've never seen this before. What do you think about this? And so the socialization aspect can't be discounted. And part of the culture of Wall Street is for them to sort of indoctrinate these first-year analysts in the culture of Wall Street, in the culture of the specific firm. And the fact that they are concerned about this class, and they're concerned about perhaps the experience of this class and the quality of this class, is one reason that they're doing that. The other reason is, Jamie Dimon hasn't been shy about this. He said that, according to the way they measure things, the performance of some of their people has actually been falling down, and specifically, the performance has been degrading on Mondays and Fridays. It's undeniable that there's an aspect of Wall Street that has that machismo, right? That has a sense of, if you don't come in, you're weak or you're afraid. If you look specifically at JP Morgan, which is sort of the tip of the spear in terms of coming back, they actually specifically called anybody with management over teams, and they called them in to come back, this week, which is September 21st. In my mind, when I saw that, even though I was told that people below management level aren't supposed to be coming in, the first thing I thought of, is, if my manager comes in, does he secretly want me to show up? And is there going to be social pressure? And will my rival on my team be there physically and therefore have a leg up when it comes time to determine bonuses? In terms of the nuance of this is that even when people come back, there are probably people who will be working 5 days a week from the office, but for the most part, they're going to be coming back in rotations. They're not going to have 100% of the people in the office anyway. Social distancing guidelines are going to require at most 40 or 50%, that they're going to be in a better place if they have, at the very least, some of their people and some of their senior managers in the office.
Pression sociale, moins de productivité, autant de raisons pour lesquelles les employés de bourse américaine vont revenir travailler. Ils ne seront pas 100% à revenir 5 jours par semaine au bureau, dit-il, mais heureusement, les managers, eux, seront là. Après l'Europe, les États-Unis redoutent eux aussi l'arrivée d'une deuxième vague, restrictions sanitaires, confinement localisé. Comment les analystes voient cette résurgence de l'épidémie? On regarde.
Coronavirus is making a comeback in Europe, even after months of social distancing measures to curb the spread. Italy reported 1,786 cases on Thursday, the UK 6,644, and other European countries are seeing a spike in new COVID cases too.
Spain and France have both recorded their highest case numbers in the last week as well. As a matter of fact, the level of cases in Spain is akin to the United States having 85,000 cases in a single day. That's how high it is there. And for France, it's akin to us having 65,000 cases in a single day.
Case numbers are rising in the U.S. as well. Over the past week, COVID-19 cases surged in 22 U.S. states, according to data from the COVID tracking project analyzed by Axios. The Midwest saw the biggest increase, but it's worth noting that testing jumped 22% over that same time period. This higher case count comes as the country braces for cold and flu season, which epidemiologists say will bring conditions that make it easier for the virus to spread.
Now, as we go into the fall, we are seeing a lot of these factors that are coming into play that probably are increasing the opportunities for transmission. As schools are reopening, as people are spending more time indoors because the weather conditions are colder and they're in closer proximity in indoor spaces, as the conditions of the weather itself may be actually facilitating the transmission of the virus more efficiently.
The U.S. is still seeing devastatingly high numbers of cases across the country, 7 million in total. And the country just crossed 200,000 deaths just this week. Experts are turning to past pandemics for an idea of what a true second wave would look like here.
The second wave of the 1918 pandemic was more severe than the first, and I expect the second wave of the coronavirus to be more severe this time around because of the fall season. And there is a potential role that school children play in sort of being a catalyst, an engine of influenza epidemiology. Direct comparisons do have their pitfalls because this is coronavirus, not flu.
And there are concerns about the economic effects as well. There are already fears that Europe is facing a double-dip recession as lockdown measures are reenacted. Wall Street investment firm Bernstein warned clients on Thursday that the U.S. is likely to see a true second wave of coronavirus, much like the one happening in Europe now. Bernstein said that U.S. markets could, quote, take some pain again in the coming months. However, experts don't think it's likely that we'll see any future lockdown measures as severe as the ones in March and April.
I do not believe that we're going to reach back to certainly a national stay-at-home order or even sort of pervasive lockdowns or stay-at-home orders. I think the mitigation this time around is going to be a lot more targeted. You might see certain cities taking stringent steps when they have dense epidemics.
Epidemiologists say the same measures used throughout the year can help limit a second wave: masks, hand sanitizer, and social distancing.
Les États-Unis ont dépassé cette semaine la barre des 7 millions de cas reconnus de coronavirus, mais également la barre des 200 000 morts. Une deuxième vague qui pourrait aussi impacter les marchés financiers. De quelle manière? Christopher Harvey était l'invité de l'émission Trading Nation sur CNBC.
Yeah, and then there's the headlines around a COVID spike, not just in some bureaus in New York, but in Europe, where you're really seeing a second wave emerge. How do you see the market interpreting the latest headlines around COVID?
So the market has a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later when it comes to COVID. And I think that's exactly what it's done. And I think you're exactly right with regard to where the pain is. If you look at Europe, the situation in Europe is, I think, a lot more difficult than it is in the States. But it really doesn't matter at this point in time because I don't think the market's really going to differentiate. We're more comfortable with the situation in the U.S., but as long as COVID's in the headlines, we think that puts weight on the equity market, which is another reason why we're still a little bit cautious here.
Yeah, and these rising cases are coinciding with just weeks now away from the election. Everyone's kind of got their prediction on how the market's going to respond before, after, during. Give us your hot take. Election, what does it mean for Wall Street?
Well, the one thing I would say is there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and it's very difficult. It's been very difficult for us to handicap this election. What I would say is, and what we're looking for is, we need to find out. We need both of these parties on stage. We need to see how they perform, and then we can make a better assessment. But at the end of the day, if this race gets tighter, the potential for a contested election is much higher. And again, we can see the VIX go up 50% in a contested election, and we can see upwards of 10% downside.
La difficulté pour les marchés sera non pas la crise sanitaire en elle-même, mais surtout l'addition de la crise sanitaire avec l'incertitude que causent déjà les élections américaines sur les marchés financiers. American Airlines finalise son prêt de 5,5 milliards de dollars auprès du gouvernement américain. Fin août, la compagnie avait annoncé la suppression de 19 000 emplois si aucune nouvelle aide financière ne lui était versée pour faire face à la crise. Elle se voit aujourd'hui accepter sa demande de prêt. Dans quelles conditions? Regardez.
Let me start first off by saying that American has agreed to a loan of $5.5 billion from the Treasury Department. You may remember that they initially had an agreement on $4.7 billion to be borrowed. They have upsized it to $5.5 billion as a requirement of agreeing to that loan. They have to take a draw of at least 10%, so they've drawn down $550 million today. In addition, American may expand how much it borrows from the Treasury Department up to $7.5 billion. So another $2 billion. What does the Treasury Department get for this? 10% of American Airlines warrants equal to 10% of whatever money is borrowed. So ultimately, if American borrows about $8.5 or $9 billion, the Treasury Department will get American warrants equal to $900 million. One other debt note, American has closed its $1.2 billion capital raise. And if you're keeping score, Melissa, American is now sitting on more than $42 billion in debt. Melissa, back to you.
Phil, the stock is moving higher in the after-hour sessions. Is this just because it's a lifeline and it's not immediately dilutive to shareholders?
Yep. That's exactly what it is. And look, it remains to be seen if they will need to borrow all of this, but the fact that they have said we may need to borrow another $2 billion in addition to that $5.5 billion, I mean, it's clear that they realize that we're into a rough 6 months here, Melissa. You will not see a big increase in passengers, and that means it's going to be tougher to get back to break even.
Wow. Phil, thank you. Phil LeBeau. We knew that this loan was going to happen. The CEOs indicated as much. We didn't know the size of this, Steve Grasso. What's your reaction? Short-term good news, but longer term for the shareholder, what does this mean?
Well, short-term good news, yes. And as you said, the stock is trading up on that. All the airlines seem to be trading up on that. But if you remember, ISI put a crazy low price target on this. Was it $1 or $2 price target on American? It is known as the weakest balance sheet out of all the airlines. So if you had to worry about one, and this is the one to worry about, if you want to go into the best balance sheet, it's Delta or LUV. I'm in Southwest because I think that the domestic airlines are going to return quicker than international travel. But we have seen a flurry of positive headlines coming out in the airlines as of late.
Yeah, Grasso's got a crackling mic. We'll work on that. As Grasso had mentioned, some of the other airlines have better balance sheets. We do know that Delta, Southwest, as well as Spirit, they've all said that they are not going to take out loans. So, Bonawyn, in your view, would that be the better bet for an investor right now, as opposed to ones that are taking out loans and just building up their debt levels?
Yes, I mean, I really couldn't state it any better. I mean, when you look at the enterprise value and the debt balance that these companies are taking on, right, this isn't because they see an investment on the horizon. This is literally in terms of them managing their cash burn and giving themselves enough runway to get back to some type of normalcy when it comes to bookings. So in terms of like really what's going to be accretive for shareholders, you definitely want to be heading to, the companies, the Deltas of the world, Southwest, literally anyone but American. They're in the worst situation, so that when things do right size, you can look at ways to be accretive to shareholders rather than having to take all of that cash and pay down debt.
La dette de la compagnie s'élèverait avec cet emprunt à plus de 42 milliards de dollars. American Airlines, après l'acceptation de ce prêt, parle déjà d'emprunter 2 milliards de dollars supplémentaires. On termine cette émission avec le tourisme spatial. Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, les milliardaires anglais comme Richard Branson ou américains comme Elon Musk s'intéressent aujourd'hui à la conquête de l'espace. Quel est l'intérêt politique et économique pour ces entreprises? C'est notre dossier du jour.
I can't think of any experience that anyone's going to have in their life that will be more wonderful, extreme than going to space.
Richard Branson has made it the goal of his company, Virgin Galactic, to open space for everyone. And he's not alone.
Fellow billionaires Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are also in the space tourism business as a new space race takes off.
Even NASA said that it would open up the International Space Station to paying visitors. But accessibility to space tourism remains limited to the richest of the rich, with ticket prices ranging from hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions. Still, experts believe the space tourism market has massive potential. A recent survey found that about 39% of people with a net worth of more than $5 million are interested in paying at least $250,000 for a Virgin Galactic flight to the edge of space.
As many as 2.4 million people or more could be interested in this opportunity. This is a supply-constrained business. A spaceship can only run about 5 times a month. So as we think about the demand relative to supply being very constrained, that's a classic luxury good dynamic where there's scarcity.
Based on the ticket prices that we've seen today, the pace of development that we see, and the supply that we have forecasted, NSR projects that the revenue sizing, it represents a $14 billion cumulative opportunity, assuming that launches start within the next 1 or 2 years and continuing through 2028.
But the point of entry is staggering. Development of these space tourism programs is costing these companies billions. And whether or not they can make up this money and turn a profit in an unproven market remains to be seen.
The technology that's required is extensive. It's essentially rocket technology, which is expensive, takes a long time to develop. There are numerous government and safety regulations, and to make it all of the more challenging, we are talking about launching people. And the risks, the regulations, the requirements are much more constrained versus launching cargo or things of this nature.
Others are questioning the massive amounts of money being spent on developing space tourism when we have some very pressing issues to deal with right here on Earth.
The road to space, if you like, is a narrow and somewhat treacherous footpath that is not accessible to very many people. And I think what we are trying to do, what Richard Branson set out to do, and what Virgin Galactic's now doing, and the other commercial space companies, is to try and transform that road to space from a narrow footpath to a broad highway. And if we can do that, then it will open up space to many more users, and that, in our view, is going to be one of the answers to managing some of the significant challenges back down here on planet Earth.
Space tourism is generally broken down into two main categories: suborbital and orbital.
With a suborbital flight, we're not actually completing a full orbit of the Earth. So the suborbital rocket will go up to the edge of space. So we are assuming this is going to be around 100 kilometers and then come right back down.
At the forefront of making orbital space tourism a reality is Virgin Galactic.
Virgin Galactic's experience would entail customers coming, doing about 3 days of training, and then strapping into the spacecraft, which is joined to a carrier jet aircraft that would lift it up to about 50,000 feet altitude, drop it. The rocket motor of the spacecraft would fire, carry people up to the edge of space. It would kind of do this slow backflip in microgravity. It's where you get a few minutes of weightlessness and kind of get to see the experience of space. And then without power, because at that point the rocket motor is already fired and is spent, it would glide back down through the atmosphere to land on a runway.
Right now, Virgin Galactic is bleeding cash. The company has reported adjusted EBITDA losses of over $50 million for each of the last 3 quarters, and did not record any revenue in Q2 of 2020.
At the moment, the revenue from our customers sort of remains in the bank account, and it will be recognized, of course, as soon as those customers take their flights.
Any stock and any opportunity where there is no revenue generation, it can lend to a highly volatile scenario. So more visibility towards revenue generation is a catalyst for stocks with no revenue.
Virgin Galactic has raised over $1 billion in funding since its inception in 2004. Though a lot of that money has come from British business magnate and founder Richard Branson and an Abu Dhabi sovereign wealth fund. Since then, more than 600 people have reserved a seat for the 90-minute tour, paying anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000 per ticket, depending on when they purchased it. Virgin says none of the money from ticket sales has been used for funding the development of its space vehicles. Instead, sales were a way to gauge market interest.
We have a huge amount of evidence that there is a very big, robust, sustainable market for private individuals to fly to space. And we're also very confident that that can be achieved at price points that can make spaceflight operations like Virgin Galactic's commercially successful in the short term.
Virgin Galactic stopped selling tickets in 2018 following the company's first successful spaceflight, and is now offering customers refundable $1,000 deposits. Virgin says 700 people have put down deposits so far, and they will be given priority to buy tickets when sales resume. But a number of technical issues and a tragic accident during a 2014 test flight that killed one of the pilots have caused delays in launching customers to space.
It was a moment which clearly anybody involved in this or any sort of business, you hope that you'll get through it. A test program without that sort of event, but it happened. And I think the important thing, which was what we did, was to take a breath, take a pause, to make sure that we did everything we could to learn from that event. And I'm sure as a result of that process, we have a better, a safer spaceship, a safer organization.
Virgin Galactic is making progress. The company has completed 27 of the 29 milestones set forth by the Federal Aviation Administration for getting its spacecraft ready for commercial service. And it's also successfully completed 2 piloted test flights. Virgin Galactic says that it plans 2 more crewed spaceflight tests before it flies Sir Richard Branson in the first quarter of 2021. At that point, the company would be ready to begin servicing its customers. Robbie Vaughn is one of those customers. He purchased his ticket back in 2006 for $200,000. And despite the long wait, Vaughn is unwavering in his support for the company.
I've been with Virgin Galactic so long, I feel like that I've got a inherent equity in how that company goes and builds and achieves its goals.
In fact, Vaughn's belief in the company seems to be contagious, as his entire family has now put down deposits for Virgin tickets. Experts say this type of customer loyalty is no coincidence.
It's about more than space travel. It's about building community. It's about building a membership program. It's about an experience with the Virgin brand as well.
Virgin Galactic really caught my interest, primarily because of Sir Richard Branson. He tends to achieve goals that he goes after. That was a big part of me wanting to become part of this team and see it through.
Throughout the years, Virgin Galactic has kept ticket holders entertained, with perks such as vacations to Branson's private island in the Caribbean. Now, even those who don't have a few $100,000 for a ticket can have a hand in the company's future.
Le tourisme spatial deviendra-t-il un jour accessible à tous? Il reste pour l'instant et sûrement pour quelques années encore réservé à une infime partie de la population. Le prix des billets pour l'espace pouvant aller jusqu'à quelques dizaines de millions de dollars. C'est déjà la fin de votre émission. Merci à tous de nous avoir suivis sur Bismart. À très vite dans Smart World.